I do not have my Sunday best on today. Obviously because it's Saturday, but still. I decided to stop at a place where I used to spend a lot of my Saturdays. Remember that? Who actually paid $30 for that? Because I'd like to meet those people. It maybe made sense if you had a family, but no way was I gonna pay 30 bucks for that. And certainly didn't. I waited until it was available for free with Disney Plus subscription, and wasn't great. No way. They actually, I believe they covered up the date on the tape there. And I don't know if they did that. Yeah, they did that with some of the other posters, which it's kind of funny because this place didn't end up opening at any time during 2020 after they all closed, I think in March. All the theaters, of course, have been closed. And we do have some theaters open still. Well, we have the one downtown. It's open for limited screen times. But this one uptown, technically a different town, but everyone calls it uptown. This one has been closed since March 2020. Yeah, I think that movie right there just got pushed back. And I actually did see Tenet in theaters when movie theaters opened for a brief time. They opened for a very brief time during the summer, but once no other movies were coming out, and Minnesota ended up making another restriction for what people could do in group settings, the theaters closed again. So since then, the downtown one has opened again, but this one is still just sitting here. It's been sitting here since March. We're almost a full year now where it hasn't been open, and this used to be the theater we'd go to the most. I haven't gone to this one in a long time, but especially long now because I don't know exactly when it's going to open again. I'm actually kind of looking here. Oh man, has a cool entrance, but alas, makes me sad. Because any movie theater that's closed is sad. We have an indie theater as well, but that one hasn't opened all year. They've been doing private screenings and films online. I did see that in theaters. They covered the date up on that one as well. But some of these, I think, I'll actually show you one where it had a 2020 date. And even that, I guess, was too hopeful. A lot of movies are getting pushed back again. So at this point, it makes me wonder if any of these movies planned for 2020 are going to come out. I mean, they already had some movies finished that were supposed to come out in 2021. In fact, they're still working on movies right now. So they're going to have all these movies that are supposed to come out in 2021, but I guess now those will get pushed back too, unless we just have a really packed year. Let me see if I can find that poster. Yeah, it was right here. So this one, whoa, I almost slipped on the ice, but only says 2020. Even that was wrong. Actually, Antebellum, that might have actually had a, I don't know. I never heard that it was released, so who knows. But, makes me sad. I think people freak out that the movie theater system is gonna die. I disagree. I don't think the whole thing's gonna fall apart, but I do think eventually there'll be less movies in theaters. I don't know about theater chains in general, but there'll always be some kind of movie theater. The indie theaters rely on mostly indie films, and they have a smaller amount of movies. We have an indie theater in town that has only 2 screens, another one that's only got 1 screen. So those kind of theaters will still exist, weirdly enough, because back in the day, that's all the kind of theaters there were. 1 screeners or 2 screeners. Even in my small town, years ago, there used to be a movie theater for 500 people. I guess there were a few more people back then, but still. Back then, it seemed like every town had 1 theater. But not since I was alive, and not since, I don't know, was that? I probably started dying down in the 60s, I would say. Then these bigger movie theaters started coming out where they had 10 screens for all the major blockbusters that were being released. Some major, some not. During the 90s, it became real cool for studios to start releasing indie stuff. So a lot of that indie stuff, rather than being released in indie theaters, would actually be released at the big screens like this. But I guess overall, I've always heard that movies have been making less and less money. The ticket price had to be jacked up because the studios were asking for more of the portion of the ticket, and so you know, the theaters were making less and less off the tickets themselves, so they were trying to make money off of concessions. I don't know. All I know is that the idea that the movie theater business could die, maybe, but not the way you probably think. You could see it happening where these bigger ones like this maybe don't, because it's a lot of screens for, you know, a lot of movies. But if you have less and less movies like we do right now, you know, it's not worth it to stay open every day. And if you don't have enough movies playing to bring people in, especially if there's not a good movie out, you're not gonna be able to survive. But I do see like studios maybe releasing less tent poles in a year. Disney certainly tries to do all kinds of different things, even though they have the successful Star Wars and Marvel. But other studios try to do different things as well. WB, they have DC, but they also been trying to make Godzilla a thing. Paramount has Mission Impossible, and they didn't really have anything else. I mean, they made a sequel to The Quiet Place, A Quiet Place, just because it really seems like they didn't have anything. Actually, I'm going to check that. Yeah, Paramount made A Quiet Place. I don't know why I had to check that for a second. They had Sonic this year, or last year. I forgot, we're not in 2020 anymore. And Sonic did really good. So maybe they could make a sequel to Sonic. It sounds like they are. But my point is that I feel like there will be less and less tent poles. Eventually. Maybe not right now. But overall, it seemed like there were less and less tent poles anyway. And it's about time people re-strategize, where they're trying to make like smaller type movies, and some movies that really shouldn't, not that I wouldn't want to see everything on the big screen, but there's quite a few movies that people only want to watch through streaming. There's no reason to go to the movie theater to see something like, I don't know, a smaller movie like Beautiful Boy, starring Steve Carell. You know, Steve Carell's a great actor, but did many people see Beautiful Boy outside of the indie theaters? No, they didn't. I mean, I'm looking at all the posters here, and yeah, these are all movies that people certainly want to go see. And there's movies like Antebellum that I don't know anything about. It's not a sequel. It's not a reboot. It's not part of a franchise. But, you know, that's every once in a while they do take a chance at something. But for the most part, it seems like there's very few successful tentpoles nowadays. You got your Star Wars, Marvel, DC, Mission Impossible, Fast and Furious, Jurassic World. Some of the animation like Pixar and Illumination seem to make money regardless of what they make. So it's like, yeah, we have those, but once you get down to it, that's not too many movies in a year. There's certainly some surprises once in a while, but for the most part, studios seem to be taking less and less risks. In a way, they're not making tentpole risks. They're just trying to, you know, rely on the franchises that make them the money, and then they maybe release some indie stuff. But there's a lot of independent groups now that just make their own stuff, or at least pick up their own stuff and don't even need a bigger distributor. I mean, like A24, I wouldn't have considered A24 a big distributor years ago, but now they're one of the biggest. And they're still not considered, you know, like a studio like Universal or Warner, but they are taking in a lot of the great indie work. And they mostly rely on the indie theaters, and the indie theaters can survive because they're smaller. They have less to do with fighting with the studios as far as getting the movies in their theaters. I don't know exactly what the logistics are. It'd be great to actually ask the local indie theater about how that all works, but I just know that profit-wise, it's not as much of a risk because fewer movies, and they're a lot more targeted with who their audience is, which is people who love movies. Like me, I'll go to the indie theater to pretty much watch anything because I love movies. If you show a movie in this theater, it doesn't mean that every single person wants to see it. Usually what happens is they'll release a tentpole like Avengers, which everybody does see, but other riskier projects, like maybe Antebellum, or maybe a sequel to a franchise that is mildly successful but not huge, like The Kingsman. Not everyone's going to see those movies. So what happens? Well, theaters live. I feel like there'll be less movies, less chances maybe on franchise movies and sequels, and maybe just sticking to the tentpoles we trust, with risks at making tentpoles once in a while. and studios more relying on their streaming services to make stuff happen. Like Warner this year, they released Super Intelligence on HBO Max. Now, Melissa McCarthy had a few movies that were in theaters and they did okay. Super Intelligence is another one that it went to HBO Max because of the pandemic. I could see them doing that more in the future, where Melissa McCarthy is an actress people still want to see, but maybe necessarily they don't think it needs to be shown in theaters. But how much money they make through streaming to just release a big budget movie, I don't know. Because let me tell you what, unless like Netflix is paying a lot of money to throw a movie on their service because they have the funds on hand at the moment, because they're very successful at the moment, they can pay for something that's super expensive to then put on their service. They tried, it sounded like, to get the new James Bond movie, but, you know, MGM, who made that movie, who's trying to distribute it, they wanted $600 million, allegedly, which makes sense because MGM doesn't have any money. You know, Disney can afford to throw something like Mulan on their streaming service. I mean, it's going to hurt them, but it ain't going to hurt them as much as MGM, because MGM is pretty much dying and they only have James Bond. If James Bond doesn't make $600 million in profit, they won't survive, and they know that. That's why they were trying to sell it for that much. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that even Netflix has their limits, and streaming services to a point can afford to have bigger movies in their streaming services. For the most part, there's still a limit, and I think that's my only fear. It's not really that theaters are going to die. It's never going to go away. The experience of being in the big theater to watch something like Marvel's never going to die. It might not end up being here. It might be at an indie theater, weirdly enough, if these kind of theaters don't exist anymore, just based on the way they kind of function, as far as like Marcus and AMC function, because they have so many screens, so many big theaters that it's almost like too big, and then if there's no movies to support it anymore, it can fall apart. So maybe we'll see Avengers in the indie theater, but I do kind of worry that bigger budget movies are going to start to go away. You know, we're not going to see risks on new tentpoles anymore. That indie director that did some really great work in a smaller budget movie will be given other smaller budget movies, but will never be given like something. Welcome back. Indie theater, I mean, an indie creator won't be able to ever be given a chance to make something bigger than the indie stuff. If that makes any sense. You know, like Patty Jenkins, she started out making a small movie, and then she was like given Wonder Woman and now a Star Wars movie all these years later. But there's only so many Star Wars and Wonder Womans that can be made. So like, for instance, I'm trying to think of other smaller directors, you know, like Edgar Wright. He's never going to be given something maybe big budget, because where's there going to be room for him in the future? He could still make indie things, he could still make middle tier movies, and maybe that's all he wants to make, but he's never going to be given the chance to make something big, I feel like, because in the future I feel like there'll be less tent poles, which I guess I don't know how you feel about that. Are you okay with the only really big movies in theaters being Avengers, Star Wars, things like that? Every once in a while maybe one tent pole is successful, but if they're taking less chances, I feel like there just will be less tent poles, and then everything that's indie or everything that's smaller, only a few select people hear about. I don't know, maybe indie stuff would become more popular, but I doubt it. I feel like there'll just be less tent poles, and then everyone will stick to whatever's on Netflix, and then Netflix movie of the week, and then we'll stop talking about it after a week. And, you know, honestly, I'm still not happy with a lot of the quality of Netflix projects. So I don't know. I feel like there'll always be a mess, and it seems like people aren't happy that the only popular movies are Avengers and Star Wars. You know, it's like, it's not like these other movies don't exist, but people do get mad that the only movies that anybody talks about are bigger movies. Well, I don't know. Theaters ain't gonna die though. Maybe bigger ones, but not the indie ones, because that experience is something everyone's always still gonna want. And who knows, I might be wrong about all this. The studios might have things figured out right now. As soon as everything is done, they might just get right back to making tentpoles, and then risky tentpoles every once in a while to start a new franchise, while still selling certain things to Netflix and HBO Max and Disney and all kinds of different things like that. Maybe pushing it to their own streaming service or selling it to a different streaming service. And I don't know, maybe once the pandemic's done, there'll be a big boom in movie theaters. Maybe everyone will be missing them so much that they'll just go see everything, every single movie that's being planned right now for 2020 that was pushed to 2021, and maybe even those movies will get pushed back, plus the movies that were already planned for 2021. Maybe they'll all be released in like every week we'll get a big movie, and there'll be so many. But maybe everybody will just go because they'll miss the experience so much. That's my hopeful idea. I like the idea that Marvel is so behind on their movie schedule right now that maybe they just release a movie like every month, which I don't know. I think that'd be cool. I think everyone would still go to a lot of them. I think they would all still make like $1 billion. Because, you know, that happens where there's just too many movies out and everyone's going to one movie versus the other. But maybe that won't happen once the pandemic's done, because everyone will just keep going to the movies because they'll miss it so much. But let's be real. People like staying at home. People are already getting sick of the theater experience in a way. So I feel like people like me will still love going to the theater. And maybe the people who are typically the ones who didn't like going to the theater anyway, but just to see a movie, maybe they just won't go because they'll know it'll be streaming in a few months, or that HBO Max is premiering it the same week. That might be beneficial to a lot of us. Helicopter flying over, they're coming after me. I don't know. See, like the HBO Max decision doesn't make me mad, because it just means that the people who like to stay at home, who don't really want to go to the theater, won't be going now. So I won't see those, you know, cell phones lighting up the front of my aisle. People are on their phone, not paying attention, or don't really want to be there. They'd rather be watching at home. There won't be loud kids, maybe. Every time I go to the theater, I'll be like going to an indie theater where everyone actually wants to be there and watch what's happening. That could happen. I'm not offering really a definitive answer, but I feel like more than likely, to me, I feel like I just see less risky tentpoles being released in theaters in the future, and more stuff being pushed to Netflix and different streaming services. Eventually things will probably get smaller budget, and, you know, they'll just be projects that, you know, the ones I take into account are probably like ones that took forever to get going anyway, like Blade Runner 2049 or Dune. Those are movies that people wanted for years, but no way were they ever going to really make their money back, because they were going to have to be big budget. They were going to have to be, you know, these sci-fi epics. But are they really going to make their money? Even if it's a great movie, which Blade Runner 2049 was, and for all intents and purposes, it was released during a perfect time of the year, and yet still no one went. I mean, it made money, but not a lot. My fear is that because of that, and the budget being too high, Warner already knows that, well, we can't just put that in HBO Max. But also, if people in general stop going to the theater as much once the pandemic's done, then they won't even attempt it at all. So those are the kind of tentpoles I'm worried about. Ones that are a little riskier, sequels that maybe wouldn't have happened that a smaller amount of people want, but, you know, they still have the money and they might be able to work out, or, you know, new tentpoles for movies that could start a new franchise. I mean, I just like movies. I like the big ones. I like the tentpoles. I like the franchises, and I like the indie stuff. So I just want it all. I'm still gonna get it all, whether streaming or in the theater, but I do kind of wonder what's gonna happen to the Blade Runner 2049s and Dunes of the world. This was all over the place, but I'm hoping to get the experience again very soon.